January 1st, 1945, Metz, France. The American airfield, known as Y-34, is burning. Republic P-47 Thunderbolts, dozens of them are scattered across the runway, engulfed in flames. Gray smoke rises into the winter sky, mixing with the dirty white snow that covers everything. Standing in the middle of this disaster is a captured German pilot. He's cocky, boastful. He just parachuted into the base after his Messerschmitt was shot down during a surprise Luftwaffe attack. 22 American Thunderbolts were destroyed, 8 more were badly damaged. It's a devastating blow. The German pilot stands with Major George Brooking, commander of the 386th Fighter Squadron. He jerks his thumb toward the burning aircraft outside and says in perfect English, "What do you think of that?" But this story doesn't end there. In fact, it's just beginning. Because what happened next reveals everything about why the Allies won World War II and about one of history's most underappreciated fighter aircraft. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into the story of the P-47 Thunderbolt during the Battle of the Bulge, the grinding, brutal, low-level war that most history books forgot to tell you about. Before we get into the battle, let's talk about the aircraft itself, because the P-47 Thunderbolt was unlike any other fighter of World War II. American pilots called it the Jug, short for juggernaut, and for good reason. This thing was absolutely massive. At 17,500 pounds at takeoff, it was the heavyweight champion of World War II fighters. Its 2,535 horsepower Pratt & Whitney radial engine gave it incredible power. And it packed 8 .50 caliber Browning machine guns, each loaded with 250 rounds. The Thunderbolt wasn't sleek like the P-51 Mustang. It wasn't pretty, but it was tough, brutally tough. Pilots would limp home in Thunderbolts with chunks of wing missing, fuselages riddled with holes, engines smoking. This aircraft could take punishment that would have brought down any other fighter. American industry built over 15,000 Thunderbolts during the war, more than any other American fighter except the Mustang. But here's what most people don't know. While the 8th Air Force P-51s were escorting bombers to Berlin and getting all the glory, the 9th Air Force P-47s were fighting a completely different war. They were operating from crude, muddy airstrips in France and Belgium runways, sometimes only 3,800 feet long. They were flying low-level missions, strafing German convoys, bombing tanks, and attacking locomotives. They were fighting what pilot Tom Glenn called the war where a lot of metal was flying around. These weren't glamorous missions. There were no high-altitude dogfights over Germany. This was dirty, dangerous, up-close fighting. And the Thunderbolt was the only aircraft rugged enough to do it day after day. 15 fighter groups, 45 squadrons, about 14,000 Americans are flying and maintaining these aircraft on the European continent, fighting a war that history largely forgot. December 16th, 1944, the Germans launched a massive surprise attack through the Ardennes forest. Hitler's last great gamble was to split the Allied forces and turn the tide of the war. German troops and tanks pour through American defenses, creating a huge bulge in the Allied line. This becomes the largest land battle the United States Army ever fought. 600,000 American troops eventually involved. And it draws in every P-47 Thunderbolt group that can reach the battle area. The very next morning, December 17th, Major John Motzenbecker leads a flight of 4 Thunderbolts along the Prather River. They're searching for enemy activity among the snow-covered fields and dark pine forests. Motzenbecker spots a main road near Monschau, Germany. He calls to his flight, "Give me some top cover, I'll go down and have a look." What he sees leaves him gaping in disbelief. Clogging the road below is a bumper-to-bumper column of German tanks, half-tracks, and trucks. More than 150 vehicles stretching 4.5 miles, all heading straight for American lines. It's the kind of target Thunderbolt pilots dream about. But Motzenbecker lingers too long. German flak reaches up and punches a hole through his wing. He zooms for altitude, reforms his flight, and radios for reinforcements. The area controller call sign sweepstakes confirms that is the enemy. Motzenbecker's response is immediate. "Then send reinforcements, we're going down on them." What follows is a marathon air-ground battle. 16 Thunderbolts from the 387th Fighter Squadron roll in on the German convoy. Taking turns by flight, they trap about 50 trucks in a crossfire from 128 50 caliber machine guns. The simultaneous attacks catch the trucks broadside. Heavy slugs blast vehicles completely off the road into ditches where they burn fiercely. The Thunderbolts sweep up and down wooded side roads, hunting for more targets. They spot tanks hiding under trees. The Hellhawks dive bomb the panzers until they disappear in boiling clouds of smoke. Several tanks are blown completely over, on fire. But the Germans fight back viciously with 20mm flak. One of the newer pilots, 2nd Lieutenant John McCarthy, is caught in the web of cannon shells. His aircraft explodes and crashes just yards from the road. He'd been with the squadron barely a month. By the end of the day, the toll on both sides is staggering. The 365th Fighter Group has destroyed or damaged 180 German vehicles and artillery pieces. An unknown number of German troops are out of action. But the Americans have lost 2 pilots to the storm of anti-aircraft fire. The running battle has blunted that German column. But Hitler's counterattack is moving forward elsewhere along the front. December 18th. Bad weather keeps most P-47s grounded. Low ceilings, solid overcast, terrible visibility. But not everyone stays on the ground. Major George Brooking, remember him from the beginning of our story, leads his 386th Fighter Squadron down through the clouds near the front. It's a calculated risk. He's betting he'll break out of the fog before he slams into the ridgetops of the Ardennes. He breaks through just dozens of feet above the ground, and there, jammed together on the valley road below, is a long column of German armor. His wingman, Captain James Wells, throws 2 500-pound bombs into a cluster of 8 tanks. When the smoke clears, 2 tanks have vanished completely. The other 6 are lying on their sides, guns twisted beneath them. The highway is now blocked by 2 deep craters. Over the next month, the weather becomes as much an enemy as the Germans. Pilots face low ceilings, icing, and terrible visibility. One historian calls it the most severe European winter of the 20th century. But here's where American industrial might makes the difference. Remember that cocky German pilot from the beginning? Let's get back to him. After the January 1st Luftwaffe attack that destroyed 22 Thunderbolts at Y-34, the German pilot is confident his side has struck a major blow. He's being held prisoner at the base, probably thinking the Americans will take weeks to recover. Within a few days, the airfield is back in full operation. Factory fresh Thunderbolts line, the ramp brand new aircraft straight from American factories. Major Brooking brings the German pilot out to see them. He points at the spanking new aircraft and asks, "What do you think of that?" The German's cockiness evaporates. He looks at the new planes at an American heartland that seems capable of building an infinite number of them. And he says something that sums up the entire war. That is what is beating us. American industry had built nearly 100,000 warplanes in 1944 alone. The Germans could destroy aircraft on the ground, but they couldn't stop the production line. When the skies cleared after Christmas, the aerial onslaught laid on by P-47 groups destroyed any last hopes German generals had for success in the Ardennes. The missions these Thunderbolt pilots flew were brutally personal. First Lieutenant Robert Bruhl flew low-level sorties over the front lines in January 1945. He describes having Army guys in Sherman tanks talking to him on the radio. The tanker would say something like, "We need you to bomb the German tank hiding behind the little farmhouse with the red roof." The problem? From overhead, Bruhl could see dozens of farmhouses with red roofs. So the solution was remarkable. Fighter pilots began rotating to the front, joining American ground troops to direct their fellow Thunderbolt flyers. Bruhl describes it. "We would be talking to somebody we knew. We could say something like, 'Turn right at the S-turn in the river, head up the 2-lane road going 15 degrees northeast, and bomb the German tank behind the 3rd farmhouse on the east side of the road.'" That level of coordination saved countless American lives. First Lieutenant Leslie Bowes flew one especially dramatic mission on December 17th, that first full day of the Battle of the Bulge. His flight was strafing a German convoy when his element leader's wingman, 2nd Lieutenant Tom Easterling, was caught in a massive explosion from below. Debris hit his aircraft. it immediately began smoking. Easterling barely managed to jump, opening his parachute just seconds before hitting the ground. He survived with compound fractures in both legs, facing months of pain and captivity in a POW camp. But Bose couldn't even complete his covering orbit before his wingman yelled that they were being bounced by more than 20 Messerschmitts. Bose pulled up to meet the attack. He got behind one Messerschmitt and opened fire, battering the right side of its fuselage. The 109 rolled over and dived straight down on fire. Then another Messerschmitt came at him head-on, its 20mm cannon firing. Bose described seeing whitish golf balls tracer rounds streaking toward his cockpit. He opened fire early, raising his nose to loft bullets toward the enemy. The two fighters came together in a deadly game of chicken. Bose held the trigger down. At the last split second, the German whipped over his Thunderbolt so close that through his canopy, Bose heard the roar of the Messerschmitt's engine. When he finally made it back to base, his crew chief counted just 66 rounds left in his 8 machine guns. Nearly 2,000 rounds were expended in one mission. Bose was credited with 1 kill and 1 probable. By the end of the war, Bose had walked away from 4 wrecked Thunderbolts, all of them named, appropriately enough, Blonde Trouble. Every single time, the rugged aircraft had brought him back alive, or close enough to survive. Tom Glenn, a P-47 pilot who later wrote about his experiences, described the reality of this kind of combat. The fighter-bomber pilot was a killer. He saw his bullets tear bodies apart. He saw his bombs explode in the middle of gun emplacements, shredding guns, ammunition, and German soldiers into small bits. He shot it out with anti-aircraft guns, tanks, and armored cars at point-blank range. In most cases, these encounters were not over until one or the other was dead. This wasn't the clean, distant warfare of high-altitude bombing. This was visceral, personal. Glenn also described one of his saddest duties, strafing columns of horse-drawn German artillery. The horses were not our enemy, he said, but our assignment was to prevent those columns from harming our troops. That's the reality of the war these men fought. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery announced the end of the Battle of the Bulge on January 7th, 1945, an Allied victory. Americans were miffed that the announcement came from Montgomery rather than from Supreme Commander General Eisenhower. They felt they'd done most of the fighting. The battle ended with more than 40,000 German casualties. But the P-47 Thunderbolt pilots didn't stop. They fought on until VE Day in May 1945. The cost was enormous. Out of over 15,000 Thunderbolts built, 5,222 were lost in combat. Another 1,723 were destroyed in non-combat accidents in the war zone. That's nearly half of all Thunderbolts built. But the contribution was monumental. Every enemy tank destroyed, every field gun knocked out, every troop convoy obliterated meant that American soldiers at the front faced a weaker, more desperate Wehrmacht. Today, some P-47 Thunderbolt pilots refer to their fight on the European continent as the war nobody told you about. While history remembers the glamorous bomber escorts and high-altitude dogfights, these men fought a grittier, more brutal war. They operated from muddy airstrips in terrible weather. They flew missions where they could see the faces of enemy soldiers. They came home with aircraft so shot up it was a miracle they flew at all. Tom Glenn summed it up simply. Mostly, we fought because we had to. We did it for each other. Unspoken in those words is something else. They saved the lives of thousands of American GIs. Those soldiers on the ground held a special affection for the 9th Air Force planes that were nearly always overhead. And when they looked up to cheer those pilots on, the fighter they glimpsed most often was the ubiquitous P-47 Thunderbolt, the Jug, the heavyweight champion, the aircraft that could take a beating and keep flying. The war nobody told you about was fought by men in one of history's toughest aircraft, and they deserve to be remembered. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments what other lesser known stories from World War II should I cover next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.